Hey everyone, how are you all doing? Geordie Golfer here, not playing golf today. So recently I did the sim build video, and to be honest, I was blown away by the amount of views that got, and I also received a ton of questions, not just about the simulator setup itself, but also the actual room itself. So I thought what I would do is a couple of follow-up videos. This one is going to be all about the garden room, and I'm going to take you through the process and the budgeted costs that I had to put into achieving something like this, because it seemed to be quite a popular question. Before I get into it, can I just ask, guys, that if you're watching this, if you're enjoying it, please give the like and also that important subscribe button a bit of a smash for me, because the last video we got an absolute ton of views. It's at about 50k, I think. But not so many subscribers, so please help me out. Give that subscribe button a bash. I would greatly appreciate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck some sort of images up and stuff as I go through this. But with any build of this size, you've got to obviously start with planning permission. So as this building internally, the height in here is 3 meters. So we had to get planning permission for that. Now that is obviously a challenge for some people maybe. We were very fortunate in as much that we had two huge like cloud conifers up the side here, and they were probably 50 to 60 foot high. So consequently the surrounding neighbours were going to lose those conifers and essentially get a building that was probably lower than most people's surrounding trees that they've got around. So consequently it was a bit of a win-win for everybody. So yeah, we had to get planning permission as one of the first answers to the questions. I think it was about £200 or something I had to pay, but obviously different local councils will have different planning rules, so you need to check that out. I'm not going to go into the planning details because it might be different for you guys. So obviously once we ditched the conifers, this then became the site of where I would temporarily put the marquee that we bought, which was about a 6x4 marquee. The next thing was to work out what size room could we use. So originally what I was thinking of doing actually with the area was, instead of going with a rectangle, I was initially thinking to maximize the room. And originally we hoped to get something that was going to be more like 7 meters by 4.5 with a slight angle on. Didn't want to go down that route in the end, because then when we started having a look at it and we're thinking, well, hang on a second, the internals are going to be a funny shape and all that kind of stuff. We ditched that, and then we worked it out, and the biggest size we could fit onto the area was going to be 6.7 by 4.3. So in fairness, still a really good size. So then the next step was to then look at the foundations, putting the concrete substrate in. So we'd already decided that we wanted to go with concrete. So we had about a 10-inch deep excavation, which was filled with hardcore blinding sand, DPM, your damp-proof membrane, and then about 8 inches of concrete, steel reinforced. So that was done by a contractor who came in. Cost of that was just a shade over 5,000, but that included the full excavation, removal of everything as well. Hard going job, one that I was happy to just pay the money and get that done. I always intended to do a timber frame build, and I followed a load of YouTube videos as to how to do timber build, and I really fancied doing that. However, then when I started looking, I then found a very, very good company called No Digging. Now, No Digging are based in Liverpool in the UK, and what they specialise in is 1.5 millimetre thick pre-galvanised formed channel steel building frame kits. Now, they actually are called No Digging because they have an option where you can actually put these like ground screws, so to do samples of the soil and then to work out the depth and the frequency of screws that have to go into there, and then you basically get a steel raft essentially, which sits on top of those, and then you build your building up on top. But because, first of all, we wanted to have the same floor level in here as we do outside of on the patio, that wasn't an option for us. A cheaper option, by the way, so if you want to do this and you weren't bothered about what I've just said there, you get the screws fitted, then you get the actual raft and then the building put on top of it. That is a more cost-effective way of doing it as an option. You can design whatever shape and size that you want. They have the structural the structural calculation software that then works out the strength of the steel, the amount of amount of stiffening that's needed in there, the section sizes that's needed and all that kind of stuff. All I did was literally give them a line drawing of what I wanted, and then they give me these drawings in return. So you can see I've got plans, I've got elevations, I've got 3D views and all that kind of stuff. So great company, highly recommend them. I'll put the details in the description. The cost for all of that from them, supply only, was about five and a half grand. The great thing about the kit of parts when it comes as you can see on the photographs. You've got various sort of panel kits essentially. So I think this room was made up of something like 15 panels, something like that. So I had to erect 15 panels, build the perimeter around, and then once the perimeter's on, you then get the steel trusses, the roof trusses, and there were so many of them to go across the lot, and the whole thing's tied together, fixed to the actual slab with self-tapping concrete anchors, and there's lots of them around here, so this thing ain't blown away. And then as far as the panels to one another, you just got a formed channel to a formed channel, and then you just basically tech screwing those to each other. So very, very simple construction method. I built the whole thing genuinely in one day, so it's quite easy to get that done. The important thing is you've got to have a very level base. If you haven't got a level base, the whole thing could be thrown out. So once the steel frame was built, it was then on to getting the external watertight essentially. And very much like a timber build, it's pretty much the same process externally. So you've got 12mm OSB board. Then on top of the OSB, you've then got the VCR, which is your vapor control layer. And then on top of that, we then had 2x2 battens going vertically and then horizontally. On top of the battens, you can then basically spend a lot of money on cladding, or you can do it a bit cheaper. It just depends on what look you're going for. From ours, we went with a brand called Trespa. It was Trespa Pura, and that's a composite cladding. It is quite high end, it is expensive, however, it just looks the business. Honestly, it looks so good. So we've got a good company in. Again, I'll put a link in the description. Company called M&C Roofing. They came in, local company, and for the external alone, just for the walls, let's say, that was approximately 10 grand. In addition to that, we then also went for the roof. You've got different options for roof. You can either have a warm roof or a cold roof. We went for a fully insulated roof externally. So what that was made up of was, again, plywood. So it's a solid plywood roof on top of the trusses. And then you've got your VCL, and then you've got about 100mm of PIR insulation. And then on top of that, you've then got your rubber membrane. And then you've got your fascias and the gutters and all that kind of stuff that's then got to get done. That part for supply and installation was about 6. So the external of the building was round about 15, 16 grandish to get the whole thing watertight, let's say, from an external point of view. Moving on from that, you've then got the bifolds. So again, these are all things that if you're doing this, if you're on a budget, you don't need, I'm going to say, fancy things like that. But when we were creating a room for several purposes, we wanted to make it nice. We wanted to make it quite high end, and we wanted to use it a lot. So we didn't want to sort of scrimp and think later on that we wish we'd spent a bit more. So yeah, so you went with bifold doors. It was a five door bifold, and it's actually a large bifold. It's 4 meters by 2.3 high, which I think is the highest standard bifold you can get. So we got that from a local company. It's the bifold and the 3 slot windows. They're all supplied in aluminium and then powder coated in an anthracite grey, which is quite nice. So the supply only for that, and I got a company that we know quite well to fit them. It was funny enough, that was about 5 grand as well. It seems in the building trade, everything appears to be in increments of 5. So basically it's either 5 grand or 10 grand or so on. So yeah, so it was another 5 grand for those. So once the external was done, we were kind of watertight at this point, and I had to start thinking about the electrics. So I had to get 10mm armoured cable, which by the way is bloody heavy. So I had about 30 meters of that to pull in. I had to pull that in from the main house, from the consumer unit there. It actually comes in behind me, behind this wall here, underground, up into the actual cavity of the actual steel frames, 150mm thick, so it comes into the cavity of that at the bottom, all the way around the walls, and then behind the hitting screen here, obviously hidden from sight, it's inside like the cupboard area. That's where we've got a sort of a dedicated consumer unit just for in here for the lights and everything like that kind of stuff. We've got external lights in the garden and all that kind of stuff, which I ran from it as well. So they had to pull all that in. Also had to go around and put the first fix in for all of the lights and also the sockets. I didn't do any terminations myself, had to get a qualified electrician to do that. But I found that doing that, I got the electrician in, he explained to me kind of what was needed. I did all the labour inside of that, probably saved myself about 2 days of his labour by me doing it, maybe more by the time pulling that cable through, because that was a task. So yes, that saved me quite a bit of cash. And then after that, it was then on to insulating the walls. So insulating the walls was a thankless task, to be honest. So around the walls, we've got 55 square meters of walls to fill. Obviously, bear in mind, we've got a big bifold there, so some of it's missing for that. And it was 150mm thick slab, so it was the rock wool material that you get, but we bought slabs so I could actually cut it with a saw. Now, as you can see in some of the images, there's lots of diagonal braces and all that kind of stuff, so doing that with like a loose fill. Could have done it with a loose fill, actually, to be fair, but I wanted to use slabs so I can get all the corners nice and tight, and just basically, it just seemed to be an easier job, but it was a labour of love for quite a few weeks doing that, just off and on, sort of in the evenings, at the weekends, just when I had time, because as it happens, I was doing all this in the summer when I want to be out playing golf as well. But anyway, that was about 500 quid. Obviously, I did all the fitting of that, so that was fine. Then after that, we then went with the Vapor plaster board, which essentially is a regular plaster board, but it's got like a foil backing. So it means that what you can do once you've put the insulation in, you can then basically put a VCL all around the inside, or alternatively, you can get the foil back plaster board, which meant that the plaster board was kind of doing both jobs. So that's the route that we went with that. And that was obviously plaster board all the way around and also the ceiling, which then just left the concrete floor. So obviously we had an exposed concrete floor at this point, and what we wanted to do was get these 600 by 600 tiles that we've got, which are really nice. They come as a pack, so you can get an inside and an outside version. Once you've got the bifolds open, you've kind of got the same tiles in, the same tiles out, which is nice. You know, the transition between inside and out is kind of seamless. So that's quite cool. And in addition, to keep the clean lines in here, we decided against any electric radiators, decided against putting any plumbing in, because we didn't want to have a plumbed heating system in here. So instead, we've got underfloor heating in here. Again, it doesn't need it. You wouldn't necessarily need to have that. When I'm using it for a golf sim, you get hot anyway, so it's fine. However, if I'm friends around, that's when we turn it on. So from this point, we've got a complete structure, ready to start doing all of the internal fitting and decorating, and obviously doing all of the clever stuff for the sim, and obviously building this thing behind me and stuff. I'm going to cover that in a separate video, because I don't want this one to be too crazy long. So again, just as I mentioned at the start of this, please give me a little subscribe if you're enjoying this content and you find it helpful. It'll help the channel a lot. So please leave some comments, ask as many questions as you want. So for this episode, that's about it, guys. Lots of questions about the garden room. So hopefully I've answered most of the obvious questions, you know, how you do it in summary and what the sort of costs are. And the next video, I'm going to touch on how I did the sort of the carpentry work, the internal fit out and all that kind of stuff. So look out for that one coming out. So that'll be part 3. And in the meantime, again, give that subscribe a cheeky press for me. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take it easy, everyone.